What if the deadliest act wasn't the blow, but the absence? What if real power didn't lie in the noise of confrontation, but in the elegance of silent waiting? There are battles won not with swords, but with patience. And enemies who don't need to be attacked, just quietly watched as they collapse under the weight of their own traps. History, power, and politics have always been battlegrounds of conflict, but also of subtlety. Behind every dramatic downfall, there's an invisible strategy. Behind every ruin, someone who knew when to stay silent, when to yield, when to vanish. There is no move more devastating than the one that seems not to exist. Niccolò Machiavelli knew this, and he hinted at it between the lines, not as a moral philosopher, but as a raw observer of human nature. To him, the art of victory didn't always require direct action. Sometimes, all it took was stepping aside and letting the enemy drown in his own reflection. As if time itself were a silent executioner, and waiting, a refined form of violence. We live in a world that worships fast reactions, instant replies, quick retaliation. But there's a kind of intelligence that escapes that logic. One that doesn't need to explain its silence, that isn't in a rush to prove anything, that understands one clear truth: those who move too quickly lose. That kind of intelligence feeds on observation, calculation, and a calm that feels almost inhuman. It's the strategy of those who don't need to move to make the ground under others shake. Of those who understand that you don't have to destroy your enemy, you just have to leave them alone with their ego, their ambition, or their own stupidity. What happens when you choose not to act, but to observe? When you don't confront, but you also don't flee? It's in that uncomfortable pause where the real war begins. Because the one who stays still while the other flails reveals something terrifying. They're not afraid. They don't need to prove anything. They're seeing beyond the moment. And for many, that's unbearable. It disarms. It hurts. It shatters. Machiavelli wasn't a fan of conventional morality. He didn't care about what was fair, only about what worked. What succeeded in the real world, where nobility is rare and naivety is fatal. He understood that the easiest enemy to defeat is the one who feels safe. The one who believes they're in full control. That kind of enemy doesn't need to be confronted. Let them speak. Let them shine. Let them trust. And when the curtain falls, when the mask turns into a face and the mistake becomes undeniable, you're still there, untouched. As if nothing ever happened. As if you never even played the game. There's a kind of war that doesn't need soldiers. A war that makes no noise, that's never written in books, yet shapes destinies. A war fought in the margins, between whispers and suspicion, between gestures and omissions. And from that space is born a kind of revenge that stains no hands, but taints everything. A way of ruining without touching, punishing without a word, exposing without a single accusation. It's about understanding the fragility of others. Not from hatred, but from a cold and exact clarity. Most people self-destruct when no one stops them. Give them a stage, give them time, give them trust, and they'll show you their worst selves. All you have to do is observe. Every ill-timed word, every excess, every repeated mistake becomes a brick in the wall they're building around themselves. And when the collapse comes, no one will remember you as the culprit. You were only a spectator. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout. A kind of power that isn't flashy. And yet, it's more feared than any open threat. Because it can't be measured, can't be anticipated, has no shape, no rhythm. It's the power of the one who knows they don't need to intervene. Who knows how to wait. Who has mastered the art of doing nothing, until everything takes care of itself. Maybe that's why the most dangerous people aren't the ones who strike. They're the ones who seem not to be there at all. The ones who stay silent when they could speak. The ones who smile when they could retaliate. Because while others burn themselves out trying to win, these people plant doubt, emptiness, silence. And no one really knows what they're planning. That mystery is their weapon. That uncertainty, their strategy. Because deep down, people fear most what they don't understand, not what they confront. The real downfall of an enemy begins the moment they realize you no longer react. When they see that all their efforts to provoke you, destroy you, or outdo you have no effect. That emptiness eats them alive. Because there's no punishment more cruel than the indifference of someone who once truly saw you. No defeat more bitter than the one with no witnesses. And no war more humiliating than the one you fight alone. Machiavelli never wrote about personal revenge, but his thinking helps us understand the nuances of hidden power. The kind that doesn't need titles, armies, or shouting. The kind that operates in the shadows, disguised as passivity, but in truth, orchestrates everything from behind the silence. Because ultimately, to ruin someone without lifting a finger isn't weakness. It's total control. And maybe, just maybe, the most perfect revenge isn't the one that destroys the body, but the one that leaves it intact while removing everything that once held it up: credibility, influence, inner peace. Because in the end, all your enemy really needs to fall is for no one to save them from themselves. And you, from a distance, without making a move, will have defeated them in the deepest way possible. There's something unsettlingly beautiful about watching masks fall without having to touch them. Something almost poetic in realizing that not everything is won by advancing, that sometimes the sharpest move is staying exactly where you are and watching your enemy spiral, not because of your actions, but under the weight of their own mistakes. It's a waiting game, one that demands deep understanding of human nature, a strategy not everyone is built for. It takes letting go of impulse, choosing the patience of someone who knows they don't need to prove anything to be in control. An enemy who doesn't feel challenged lowers their guard. They relax. They show off. Their voice gets louder, their decisions more reckless. They feel safe. They think they've already won. And that's exactly when the fall begins, slow, almost invisible at first, like a crack quietly spreading through the foundation of something proud. They don't need external help. Just time. Once the ego is fed without resistance, it becomes the worst possible advisor. It pushes them to overtalk, to act carelessly, to trust their vision as if it were flawless. And meanwhile, you just breathe. You wait. You do nothing, and yet, everything starts to happen. This kind of power doesn't make headlines. It doesn't seek applause. But its impact is devastating. Because there is no shield against oneself. No defense when the enemy isn't coming from outside, but from within, when what destroys them isn't an outside force, but the slow buildup of poor decisions, misplaced words, and gestures that isolate them in front of others. And you didn't touch a thing. You were barely a silence in the room. A quiet witness. And still, somehow, you were more present than anyone else. In the hands of someone wise, time is deadlier than any weapon. Machiavelli knew this. It's not about intervening all the time, but knowing exactly when not to. Most people lose by doing too much, by trying to dominate, to crush, to make it clear who's in charge. But those who master the art of waiting know that impulse is not your ally. It's a trap. Acting without real need exposes weakness, urgency, insecurity. But the one who stays still? They send a different message, one of real power. The kind that doesn't need action to be felt. There's a language in silence. A way of speaking without words that weighs more than any speech. When you choose not to respond, you're saying, "You don't matter to my peace." When you refuse to play the other person's game, you disarm them. You take away their battlefield. Because what the enemy needs most is your reaction. They want to see you rattled, hurt, exposed. They need your involvement to justify their attack, to feed their story. But if you don't play, the game falls apart. And that slowly eats them alive. Nothing poisons more than the absence of a fight when someone came prepared for war. A sword with no opponent rusts, and someone who wants conflict but can't find it eventually turns on themselves. They start searching for reasons that aren't there, tearing down their own allies, suspecting the very people who stood beside them. Your silence becomes unbearable noise in their head. Why isn't he responding? What is she planning? What does they know that I don't? And just like that, without lifting a finger, you've planted chaos. You've shaken their castle. You've become wind without form, a shadow with no face. But operating this way isn't easy. It's not comfortable. It takes a strength you don't learn from books or mimic from others. It takes silencing that primal urge we all carry, to respond, to fight back, to declare our truth. You have to choose. Do you want to be right, or do you want to have power? Do you want to win the argument or command the board? And that choice is constant. Because sometimes silence doesn't just disturb the other person, it hurts you too. It hurts to stay quiet when you know you're right. It hurts to watch when every part of you wants to jump in. But that's exactly where real strategy is born. Where you let go of what's immediate to protect what's lasting. This isn't about being passive. It's about being surgical. Knowing every move has weight, and that sometimes moving weakens your position. Like a chess master who doesn't touch a piece without a purpose. Every non-action is its own kind of statement. Every silence is a stance. Every well-timed withdrawal is a step forward on a deeper level. Because the power you can't see is always the most feared. And the respect you don't demand is the kind that actually lasts. This approach also reveals something raw about the human condition, that the real enemy isn't out there, it's in here. The inflated pride, the hunger for control, the obsession with being admired, those are forces that, eventually, turn on whoever feeds them. By not interfering, you simply let those forces do their work. You haven't destroyed anyone. You just let them keep being exactly who they are, without correction, without warning. You left them alone with their reflection. And in that solitude, in that echo with no reply, their downfall begins. Sometimes, destroying without touching is actually an act of compassion, though it may not look like it. It's refusing to be part of a dynamic that only prolongs the illusion. It's a quiet way of saying you're no longer available for their games, that your energy has moved on. And that decision, as quiet as it may be, has consequences. It breaks connections. It reveals truths. It redraws lines. Because when you walk away, when you choose not to react, you're also saying, my peace is not up for negotiation. And even if you never say those words out loud, they echo. The key isn't to hide or suppress conflict, it's to redirect it to the right place, the void. That space where there's no echo, no audience, no opponent to complete the other. That place where someone becomes their own undoing, without you having to lift a hand. Because they don't need an enemy to fall. They only need to keep being who they are, under the relentless light of time. And meanwhile, you stay. Not as a victim. Not as an executioner. As something far rarer, the witness to a fall you didn't cause, but also didn't prevent. The one who understood that sometimes, the greatest act of power is simply not being there. And in the end, when everything has been said, or more precisely, when everything has been left unsaid, what remains is silence. That untouched space where victory doesn't come with celebration, where there are no cheers or recognition, because no one knows, except you, that the battle was yours. The gaze of someone who has won without lifting a single finger doesn't need witnesses. It doesn't need justification or explanation, or to recount the steps. Because real strength never shouts. It just is. And that contained presence, that unspoken power, is what unsettles those who constantly crave confrontation to give meaning to their fragility. It's not cowardice as many might assume. It's clarity. The kind of clarity that lets you see how time does far better what rage tends to ruin. That rushing to correct, punish, or respond often means giving the other person exactly what they need to reinforce their narrative. Sometimes, responding is validating. Getting involved is handing over a part of yourself to someone who doesn't deserve your energy or attention. And it's exactly there where the most revolutionary gesture lies. In not resisting. In stepping out. In becoming a wall of stillness against which everything crashes, and you didn't even have to lift a hand. But that decision doesn't come without pain. We've been taught that silence is submission, that waiting is weakness, that inaction means surrender. Yet there's a kind of silence that screams louder than any words. A kind of waiting that burns through someone like slow fire. A kind of inaction that isn't resignation, but the clearest statement that you no longer need to defend yourself. That you've understood your enemy was never a real threat, just a warped mirror of something you've already outgrown. True strength doesn't live in a clenched fist or a quick comeback. It lives in the calm of someone who no longer needs to convince, to retaliate, or to prove their worth. That calm isn't inherited, and it isn't improvised. It's built through wounds that taught you, betrayals that didn't kill you, and internal battles that left scars, deep but silent. It's the calm of someone who's fallen and risen so many times, they no longer fear other people's falls. They just watch and understand that everyone has their own abyss, their own timing, their own wall to hit. Because the truth is, no one escapes themselves. Sooner or later, the one who lies gets tangled in their lies. The one who betrays ends up surrounded by suspicion. The one who fakes power collapses when the attention fades. And you? You don't have to do anything. Just step back. Just be elsewhere. Just build a life so far from the conflict, so at peace with your truth, that your very existence becomes unbearable for those who thrive on chaos. Something shifts when you get there. It's no longer about destroying anyone. Not even about protecting yourself. It's about choosing your direction. Deciding who gets to live in your mind, your thoughts, your energy. And once you realize that some enemies don't even deserve that tiniest fraction of you, everything becomes clearer. Their downfall is no longer your mission. It's just an inevitable side effect. A consequence of stepping out of the game, of letting go of the rope, of releasing even the need to be understood. The real victory doesn't happen when the other person falls. It happens when you no longer want them to. When their existence no longer matters. When their voice doesn't echo in your mind, when their name doesn't stir anything inside you. That emptiness isn't indifference, it's freedom. It's the sign that everything that used to bind you to that person, that dynamic, that wound, has dissolved. And now you can move forward without dragging ghosts behind you. Machiavelli spoke of power as something to be protected, defended, preserved. But even in his most ruthless words, a deeper truth slips through. The most lasting power is the one that doesn't need to be seen. The most absolute control is the one that requires no touch. And the smartest strategist isn't the one who crushes his enemy. It's the one who simply removes them from view. Not out of fear, but out of inner superiority. Because they no longer need to prove anything. That's the final move. Not a loud gesture. Not a cutting phrase. Not a public act of revenge. Just silence. Just the exit. Just the firm step in the opposite direction. While the other keeps spinning in their own chaos, you're already in a different map, a different time, a different life. And that, though invisible, though unspoken, is what truly destroys. Because no one survives irrelevance. No one tolerates that their worst attempt at hurting you was met with calm, with disinterest, with complete forgetfulness. But getting to that point isn't easy. It means going through every stage of ego. Wanting to speak. Wanting to respond. Wanting to put the other in their place. And then, little by little, releasing that need. Letting it fall like old skin. Until eventually, what once fired you up now barely touches you. And there, in that chill that isn't resentment but clarity, your real power begins. A lucid life isn't built by eliminating enemies, but by learning not to need them. By understanding that sometimes the greatest victory doesn't leave bodies behind. It leaves silence. That the harshest punishment is not being heard. That the worst defeat isn't falling, it's being left alone with your own noise. And you're no longer there to see it, because your gaze is pointed elsewhere, towards something bigger, cleaner, yours. It's not arrogance. It's purity. The purity of choosing not to react, not to hate, not to hold on to what no longer belongs to you. And that purity, though quiet, leaves marks. Because the world is full of noise, but there are so few who know how to walk away with dignity. Who know how to watch without interfering. Who understand that some downfalls don't need to be pushed, just timed. Maybe that's the deepest lesson of it all. That sometimes, the greatest act of power is stillness. That the most subversive move is calm. That the smartest way to ruin someone who tried to hurt you is to show them, without saying a word, that they failed. That they didn't get your attention, your anger, or your reaction. And you, untouched, quiet, unshaken, became not their rival, but their mirror. And there's no downfall more devastating than finally seeing yourself reflected.